Scientists once ran an experiment. They left people alone in a room with nothing but their own thoughts. No phone, no book, just silence. And they found something disturbing. Most people would rather press a button that gave them a painful electric shock than sit there for 15 minutes doing nothing. But a small percentage of people did something strange. They didn't press the button. Not once. Not even close. They just sat there, calm, almost relieved, like something in them had finally exhaled. While everyone else was clawing for any distraction they could find, these few people looked like they'd been given permission to rest for the first time all week. For years, society had a word for people like this: antisocial, broken, cold. But what if that word was wrong? What if what looks like a flaw is actually something else entirely? A design, not a malfunction, a structure, built deliberately, the way a house is built, with load-bearing walls in exactly the right places. And once you understand it, you can never unsee it, not in yourself and not in the people you thought you had already figured out. There are 5 traits that quietly separate the solitary mind from everyone else. Most people only ever notice the first one. Almost no one makes it to the 5th. Stay until the end because the 5th one changes the meaning of everything that comes before it. The first trait starts in that same room, in that same silence. Neuroscientists call it elevated internal awareness. For most brains, silence feels like an absence, a gap, something missing that urgently needs to be filled with noise, with scrolling, with anything at all. But for the solitary mind, silence isn't empty. It's occupied, fully. The brain doesn't power down when the outside noise stops. It turns inward instead and starts working. Old conversations quietly replay themselves. Ideas that never seemed related suddenly connect. A problem from 3 weeks ago solves itself somewhere in the background without being asked to. This is why some people call solitude boring and others call it the only time they can actually think. It was never really about how much stimulation a person needed to feel alive. It was about where that stimulation was coming from all along, inside or outside. But if the mind is this active on its own, this alive in the quiet, why do these same people so often admit they feel completely drained after spending time around others? That's the part that confuses almost everyone, including the solitary people themselves. They assume it means they're bad at socializing, that there's some social muscle missing in them that other people have. The truth is almost the exact opposite of what they've been told their whole life. This is the second trait, and it's the one most often mistaken for a weakness. Researchers call it high-intensity social processing. Most people experience a conversation the way they scroll a phone. Quick glances. Surface reads, moving on before anything really lands. The solitary mind doesn't skim like that. It reads everything, all at once, without asking permission. The pause before a sentence, the flicker behind someone's eyes, the tension in a shoulder that nobody else in the entire room even registered. Every single conversation is being processed at full resolution, constantly, whether they want it to or not. That's not a small task to run in the background. That's the mental equivalent of 10 browser tabs open at once, while everyone else in the room is comfortably running one. Of course it overheats faster than everyone else's. It was never doing less work in that conversation. It was doing far, far more every single time, without anyone ever noticing the effort behind it. Which raises an uncomfortable question. If they're absorbing that much detail from other people constantly, where does all of that information actually go? It doesn't just vanish into nothing. It has to land somewhere inside them. And for a specific slice of the population, somewhere between 15 and 20% of people, it lands as something closer to a sixth sense entirely. This is the third trait, and the people who have it rarely talk about it out loud because it sounds strange the moment you try to explain it to someone else. They can walk into a room and know the mood has shifted before a single word has even been spoken. Tension nobody has named yet. Sadness someone is hiding carefully behind a smile. They are not guessing at any of this. They are reading it. Psychologists sometimes describe it as an emotional radar, always quietly scanning. And it explains something that used to look like a flat contradiction. Why the person who seems to care so deeply about everyone in the room is also, somehow, the very first one to leave the party. It was never that they stopped caring about the people around them. It's that they'd spent all night receiving everyone else's signal. And somewhere in that noise, they lost their own. Solitude, for them, was never about hiding from people. It's simply the only place quiet enough to hear themselves again, clearly, without static. Now, here's where this actually gets interesting. What happens when a mind like this, already processing at this depth all day, is finally left alone with nothing left pulling its attention outward at all? Where does all of that unused focus actually go? This is the fourth trait, and history has already answered the question for us more than once. Nikola Tesla claimed some of his most important ideas arrived only in isolation, fully formed, as though they had simply been waiting for the silence to finally show up. Franz Kafka once wrote that he needed to be alone the way certain plants need light to survive. Not a preference he indulged, a requirement his mind couldn't function without. Because creativity doesn't usually happen when a mind is already full of other people's noise. It happens in the gaps, when nothing external is competing for space, and two unrelated ideas are finally free to bump into each other and quietly become something new. For the solitary mind, solitude isn't a break from the real work. It is the work, the engine itself, not the rest stop along the way. So if solitude fuels them this deeply, why do they still say yes to plans they secretly don't want to attend? Why do they still sit through conversations that leave them feeling completely hollow afterward, every single time? If the fourth trait is about power, the fifth one is about protecting it, carefully, at almost any cost. And this is the trait almost nobody ever talks about, because on the surface it sounds selfish, right up until you actually understand what it's doing. Researchers have a blunt name for it. Some call it the gas station sushi filter. Before a solitary mind agrees to any social interaction, some quiet part of it is already running a silent calculation. What will this actually cost me, and what will I get back? A shallow conversation isn't neutral to a mind like this. It's not simply nothing. It's actively depleting. In the exact same way spoiled food doesn't just fail to nourish you, it makes you sick afterward. So over time, without ever consciously deciding to, their social circle quietly gets smaller. Not because they couldn't have more people in their life if they wanted to, because they stopped collecting people and started curating them instead. Depth over quantity, every single time, without exception. And that's usually where most people stop and assume they finally understand it completely. But there's one more distinction hiding underneath all 5 of these traits, and it's the one that quietly decides whether any of this is actually healthy or something else wearing its exact same face. Solitude can be two completely different things dressed identically. It can be a preference, a place someone returns to on purpose, to recharge, to think clearly, to grow into more of who they already are. Or it can be a shield, a wall built quietly over years, one brick at a time, to avoid the risk of ever being rejected again. From the outside, both look exactly the same. Someone sitting alone, seemingly content.
But one of them is choosing freedom. The other is only avoiding pain. And only the person sitting inside that silence actually knows which one it is. If solitude feels like freedom, if you could walk back into the noise anytime you genuinely wanted to, and you're simply choosing not to right now, that's strength. That's a mind that found its own frequency and finally decided to protect it, no matter what anyone else called it.
The quiet was never the defect. It was the design, built for depth, in a world that only ever knew how to reward volume. If you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe.